So, good evening, everybody. I'm Tatiana Bazzichelli, curator of Transmediale Festival, and I'm here to briefly introduce this great speaker we have this night. This is the third stream, the third panel of the stream, Ashes to Ashes. And now we have been speaking a lot about data in the days before. Now we are instead speaking more about concrete practices that also happen in the streets, but also we are referring to data too. The name of the panel is called Restricted Network Strategies of Survival After Uprisings. And we are mainly going to concentrate on the Arab revolutions and the uprising in the Middle East. And so the idea would be, from one side, to try to reflect on the role of networking and activism during the Middle East uprising, but at the other side also reflect on the countermeasures that have been adopted against the so-called cybercrime during time of conflicts. So we will have really different approaches, also different perspective. And now I'm going to introduce our moderator, that is actually also a participant, because she asked me when we had our dialogue also to bring her perspective into this panel, and I think it's something that I really appreciated. So I think it's great also when the moderator has the possibility to say something about the subject she researched. And her name is Miriyam Auoragh. I hope I say it right. Anyway, she will tell maybe better than me. It's really difficult to pronounce it. And she is an activist and researcher from Palestine. And in 2001, she embarked a PhD research regarding the implication of the internet in Palestine. Especially also she got involved in anti-war and anti-racist campaign. And she was a postdoc fellow at the Oxford Institute, Internet Institute. And I think a big part of your work is, has been working on the idea of social media and the internet applied also on social movement and uprisings. So I think it would be really interesting to understand also how you are seeing this specific subject. At the moment, she's also working on these topics at the University of Westminster. And so I'm really happy to welcome these participants, and I have to just say something practical, that unfortunately one of the participants is not here, Donatella Della Ratta, because due to a big rain in Rome, and often happen in that city, everything was blocked, so she could not reach the airport. But anyway, we have other great speakers with us, so I leave the word to you, and thanks a lot for being with us.
Hello. Is this one working? Yeah. Thanks for this very generous introduction, Tatiana. First of all, thank you for having me here, and also for having me say something. I initially didn't understand I was going to moderate. I thought I was presenting my usual spiel, but I'm interested in doing both. So do stop me if you feel that I'm exploiting my position as a moderator. I've already asked my colleague Philipp to time me, because I'm notorious for going over time, so really do, after 20 minutes, send me death threats or whatever. So I have to start with two disclaimers. First of all, as Tatiana already explained, I've also been politically involved, and we can be politically involved in different ways, as activists, as academics, as developers, as designers, what have you. And I think one of the things that unites all of us is that we reject the idea of objectivity and neutrality. So I want to start from that point, that I'm not having any objective or neutral position regarding the topic of my presentation. I take side in the uprisings, and it's, I think, quite obvious which side I'm taking. I'm not apologetic to that, but we don't have to be neutral or objective to be able to have a critical deconstruction of what we're studying, and I hope that this presentation shows why that is the case. The second disclaimer, I think, is also, and I'm really happy the way this conference is framed, and I think Tatiana and her colleagues wrote a brilliant text that accompanies this conference in the magazine and in the invitations. The idea of the afterglow, which I hope to deal with in the end of my presentation as well, because I really do not wish to be dragged into this sort of boring Morozov versus Shirky false dichotomy between the utopian and the dystopian implications of the internet. I think it's a very academic discourse based on ideal types that do not relate at all to practical realities on the ground, which are very messy and dirty, and I think at the moment also involve a lot of trash. So those are two important ways to frame my work. And let's begin with the actual people in Syria, because my talk is about Syria, or rather about Syrians, or rather about Syrians who take position against their own dictatorship. I think it's really important for me as someone with a political anthropologist background who's been mostly involved on the ground as an ethnographer to end and to start with the people I'm trying to understand and research. And I think it's important to remind myself and hopefully all of you that this is a topic related to something that's happening in the here and now. It's not a history, it's not a reflection on the past. I'm talking about masses of Syrians that are engaging in resisting the regime as we speak. And I think what is really interesting is that we are living in an era where it is impossible to resist or to be an activist or to do a revolution, so if you want to call it like that, only from a physical point of view. We are in an era where Syrians have to do what they do from their physical spaces and places, but also from their virtual spaces. And this has raised new problems, new dilemmas, because the question that interests me most is what happens when these spaces, these virtual spaces, these cyber dynamics are no longer, if they ever were solely, the unique property of non-elites. That's the way we discussed and studied political activism in a digital age, since the Zapatistas, the anti-WTO protests in Seattle, the anti-war movements, and the social forums. We kind of had this epistemological bias that the internet and online technologies and spaces are the tools of dissidents who use them against those in power, governments, companies, etc. So what happens when you're in a situation where these spaces are no longer the unique property of non-elites? Because I think one of the most important conclusions after 3 years of incredible transformations emanating from the Middle East, which have caused political earthquake, if you will, elsewhere in the world. People who went into the streets in New York and started Occupy Wall Street were saying we were inspired by people who occupied Tahrir, workers who occupied their city council in Wisconsin were holding posters saying Tahrir is here. People in Spain, the Ignado movement, Greece, anti-austerity movement, they were all making these international references to one another. And eventually, of course, people in the Arab world also taking inspiration from protests in Turkey and last summer, in Greece, etc. So we see this kind of dialectical international formation by default. What happened in the process was that the internet allowed these movements to widen up, to inflate, to have reference points that are beyond their local or national frameworks. It did so because it allowed people to disseminate their voices, their images, their styles, their narratives, their songs throughout the rest of the world. But what we also know after 3 years is that the internet also, almost by design, had a shrinking effect on the public space. It also shrank our imagination and our possibilities. And some people see this as contradictions. So how come did the protest movements and the revolutions show that the same tools that people use to widen their public spaces and to strengthen their side actually turns against them boomerangs? In the beginning, I speak for myself as well, is the reflex is kind of, you see it as an abnormality. It shouldn't be like this. You know, the internet should be a tool of the dispossessed, and we should be doing the hacking, we should be doing the surveillance. But eventually, the way the revolutions matured, we've seen that it's actually very much part of a normality. When I started reading about revolutions in order to understand what is going on at the moment, and to do, of course, my usual conference papers and my lectures, one of the most important and inspiring studies and texts that made me rethink was Marx's writings on the French Revolution. And he really was able to describe this paradox in a very convincing way, basically arguing that revolutions always are joined by counter-revolutions. You cannot have a revolution without it being countered by state powers, by other parts of the societal community that have vested interest in the status quo. And if we would expand that analysis to seeing how the internet can be implicated in this dialectic analysis, then we should say internet activism is by default always going to be joined by reactionary forms of internet activism, by counter-revolutionary, basically, applications of the internet. And I think that the lessons that all these old people have drawn from the French Revolution and the English Revolution and other literature, I think we are now in a moment where we can start doing similar types of critical analysis based on the Arab revolutions. Of course, partly because we are in the enormous, crazy, privileged historical moment where we actually witness these revolutions going up and down, pushed back. We can see how people make 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. It's in the news every morning when we wake up, and we read that in the newspaper at night when we fall asleep. So I think it gives us a privileged situation to also use the momentum and critically analyze these questions. What is very obvious in the case of Syria is that the gatekeepers of the regime, those who have a vested interest in the regime's status quo, really do lay claim to really exactly the same spaces of the internet and mobilize through really equivalent virtual zones. They use the same propaganda tools on social media, the mainstream tools, such as Facebook. They use the same tools to disseminate information to international journalists, such as Twitter. And they apply the same kind of hacking methods to silence and close off oppositional voices. This is interesting because it does not mean that the positive, revolutionary, progressive, whatever you want to call it, applications of the internet are now over with and doomed or done with. We actually see a parallel movement. We still see activists using the internet, for instance, to produce and to show a kind of visual or artistic critique, to mobilize people or to give people a sense of humanity, that what they're doing is worthwhile. I had an example that I thought was hilarious in another slide. This is one of those creative productions of Syrian activists. Does anyone, it says in Arabic, well, you know what the logo is, right? Peugeot. And you know, it's a lion, and Bashar al-Assad name, Assad means lion. And in Arabic, Peugeot, this is how you write Peugeot in Arabic, also means they come. So basically they come and they go. It's one of those moments when I thought, Jesus, I'm imagining someone designing this while, you know, bombs are falling down the road or people are being arrested or surveilled. And these moments, these tiny, tiny moments of, you know, rebellion are still very important. They still happen every day. But they have become, we have to be honest, really tiny dots in this enormous online political consumption we're seeing going on now. So these brave and very important creative examples are unlikely to be able to tip the scale because they are producing and coming up with these beautiful examples amid a whirlwind of aggressive content and extremely loud pro-regime noises. Again, do we see this as a contradiction? Do we think that this shouldn't be the case? I think what it actually shows is that the revolution was making an advance. It shows that Syrian activists and revolutionaries were pushing and pushing forward to a moment where they were becoming an actual threat to the status quo, the regimes, first of all in Syria and regionally. So I kind of thought this way Marx described it, that the counter-revolution is a sign of the revolution not taking place or losing, that on the contrary, it actually confirms that the revolution is deepening and that the quest for radical change is being met by the same radical challenges. So when Tatiana wrote that media technologies and practices were once treasured and turning into trash, I thought, my God, she phrases it so much better than I could actually come up with. This is actually the sentiment or the feeling that most activists would have when they see the kind of pro-regime noise. It's trash. It's actually something that was treasured turning into something that is despised. So we could say that it's true that the post-social media hype is the moment we're in now, and that the hype about social media is actually of a different nature than the hype about the internet 10, 15 years ago, namely an oppositional hype. But that's why I started with the disclaimer, that I think we should move beyond the boring dichotomies between the dystopian and the utopian elements of the internet, and that we should actually place them in this dialectic understanding of revolution, where these contradictions are actually signifying another form of a truthful analysis. So I start from the concrete and the everyday, which means that I want to shed light on the structures that tend to favor the regime in Syria. And I do this by trying to imagine how different elements of counter-revolutionary dynamics, yet mediated through the internet, mediated by internet technology, are basically illustrating the social media ecology within which activists have to maneuver. It's not enough to say, you know, the regime surveils or uses propaganda measures. We need to basically deconstruct these different elements and dynamics. And so far I've come with this sort of triangle, where on the one hand, of course, we see what a lot of us discuss, and have to discuss, and that is the reality of corporate complicity. The internet is not a neutral technology. It's a commodity. It's a big business commodity. it's not meant to liberate us, or it's not meant to help activists. Where they help activists is coincidental or side effects. One of the major examples of corporate complicity hampering concretely Syrian activists is, for instance, this big business of surveillance tools. Our companies in America, in Italy, in Germany, they make a lot of money out of these nice tools like Blue Coat and others, selling it to people like Bashar al-Assad. So this corporate complicity is one of the big circles that impede activists on a daily basis. The second circle is the way the internet has transformed the abilities of the state or oppressors to design and develop propaganda and apply media censorship. So propaganda is one other dynamic that Syrian anti-regime activists have to deal with on a daily basis. This is very closely related, of course, to corporate complicity, because if we look at corporate complicity in the local level of Syria, you don't need to be smart to understand that when the state owns the telecom sector, it actually makes it much more easier to organize propaganda on massive scales. And so we regularly see TV performances of so-called testimonies of people who are saying in front of the camera that they were hired to kill people and that they were funded by America or Saudi Arabia to stir up Syria. And even if people are distrustful of the state's ability to lie, if you pump this enough on a daily basis, you know, some of it does trickle down and makes life really hard for activists and makes it much harder for them to mobilize people to their side. And the last big circle is the mukhabarat, the secret service. I don't have exact facts or figures. I'm still trying to understand, and if people do, please say so in the discussion or come to me afterwards. But we can probably safely say that the abilities of the mukhabarat and the power of the mukhabarat, of the secret service, has multiplied by 5, 10-fold with the use of the internet. Just think of how speed and the ability to survey, taken together, enhances and perfects the existing measures of a secret service. And think of this also in terms of the fact that the Secret Service has a special branch that is purely focused on internet and internet activists, such as the Syrian Electronic Army, which I placed in the middle because they're part of all these circles. So basically, young computer science graduates in Syria are recruited by the army to be those hackers and those geeks, but then in the purpose of countering their fellow Syrians, to snitch on and survey people that they used to share lectures with. Not long ago, there's an interesting example of one guy I discussed in the paper who was recruited by the state, refused, and then joined the revolution. He was called the hacker of Aleppo and had to flee to Turkey when they caught up on him as well. So this is the social media ecology that is visualizing, I think, the bitter truth of what internet and internet technological means can potentially mean in this moment of afterglow of post-hype. So I do listen to what Tatiana wrote and says about this kind of trash, digital trash functioning similarly basically to natural resources, that they produce the kind of physical and immaterial waste that then get appropriated in different contexts such as the mukhabarat, to develop new surveillance schemes. So my contribution here basically is to show this garbage that is hovering between the margins of the revolution and the counter-revolution, that sort of turns counterculture, the way we discussed counterculture 20 years ago, into dominant culture. Why do people do that? We don't understand. Syria confuses us. Egypt was much easier, right? Because 99% of the people were against Mubarak. They all shared the same interest to overthrow the state. I think that's another thing that that we need to think critically about. Arab countries, Middle Eastern countries are like any other modern capitalist nation state. They are structured according to different classes with different interests. And when the revolution erupts, it will also harm people who have a very important self-interest to protect the status quo. And so we should not just see it as a foreign plot. We should not just look at the events in Syria through the eyes of some of our journalists in Britain or Germany and what have you, by basically having this top-down geopolitical analysis that it's Iran or it's Hezbollah. It's also a very mundane, annoying fact of Syria being like any other society where groups are divided and conquered precisely because of the productivity of dividing people against each other. I think this is one of the examples that I meant also of we need to find ways to sort of criticize this techno-Orientalism. There is this embedded Orientalism in the way we look at these events, right? We like to sort of have these black and white analysis, the Sunni, the Shia, or you have the pro-Western and anti-Western. Those are mostly bullshit analyses that are very welcome for us to simplify the way we look at things, but do not coincide with reality. The other element of Syria that I want to bring in is also the fact that people who are against the uprisings or revolutions are not only co-opted and bought off because they are, you know, they have self-interest in socio-economic sense of the word, but there is an actual concern that we cannot just ridicule away. Some people that I know personally, and we all have anecdotal examples, I guess, of people who kind of half support the state, are motivated by this belief or this concern about imperial intervention. And that's not difficult because the region has a history, and a very recent one, where external muddling has always been in the interests of powerful nations, where it never was in the interest of ordinary people to muddle, to choose one side over the other, to arm this one and not arm that one. So this cynicism about Syria has very much to do with the fact that our countries in Europe and in North America are muddling too much in Syria based on beliefs and principles that are not genuine. And we know that, people know that. I know that. I never hear them say the same things about Bahrain as they say about Syria. It makes me cynical, makes me distrust the motives. So you can't really only blame people for being very wary and concerned about the way the Syrian revolution has started and developed. One very important symbolic issue throughout the region, and I think it should be throughout the world, is the case of Palestine. Syria, together with a couple of other countries and movements, are seen as being crucial in the defense of Palestine or in countering Israeli occupation. Now, I personally think that's too much credit for Syria. I haven't seen them done anything to help Palestinians, except for bombing Palestinian refugee camps in Damascus. But on an emotional level, this is a very important strategy. So one of the major impediments in the movement is the use of Palestine as sort of emotional blackmail to raise distrust against Syrian revolutionaries. And this is happening very clearly in the circle of propaganda. This is, by the way, a very simple Photoshop that I received on my Facebook thread. Nice picture of Syrian activists demonstrating, carrying Israeli flags. Now, anyone who knows the Middle East knows that you can't carry an Israeli flag. That means you are pro-Zionist. And then I thought, I've seen this picture before, but it was a bit different. So I procrastinated, I think, for 3 hours, and I found the original picture underneath it, which is Syrians carrying a Palestinian flag, but then it was photoshopped and disseminated online. So I guess when the dust has settled, we can see how these gatekeepers of the regime lay claim to the same spaces and how they mobilize through these virtual zones. This is the concrete translation of these beautiful academic terms. And I do actually think this is a kind of in-between state, this state of mind between the moment of being completely drugged and happy, as we were 3 years ago. We were all crying and opening champagne bottles. We thought this was the beginning of a new era. And now we're sort of, the dust has settled, and we can see that there's another dust rising up from the streets of Homs and Aleppo that don't really resonate with this moment of happiness. But I don't agree that we woke up from this sort of moment of happiness and are in a kind of, wake-up mode and only have nostalgia about how beautiful it felt and how nice it was. This is not the reality in Syria. There is no time for nostalgia. There is no time for afterglow. It doesn't allow, the situation doesn't even allow you to have this moment of post this or après that or afterglow. But I do agree with trying to use this waste, this trash, trying to actually deal with it in a pragmatic way and turning them into starting points from which we can deal with these burning issues, which is why I'm really curious to hear Philipp's talk. How does this trashy shit of propaganda and surveillance, how does this bring up new starting points to rethink about concrete ways to counter surveillance, counter propaganda tools? How can we start from this and think about solutions, which is, I think, also what you're trying to be saying later in terms of how fear and how anxiety of very concrete issues force you almost to be more creative and to be more open to new solutions. So we need to deal with these new burning issues that are emanating from Syria while we struggle to find these new pathways in the wastelands of the aftermath. So when I read Ashes to Ashes, it means something different for me because I'm not from a science, computer science background or design background or what have you. It means how can I relate Ashes to Ashes in terms of what it literally means in Syria, the ashes of the rubble that come up from Yarmouk refugee camp or from the mass graves. How do we conceptualize this in a different way that actually starts from the bottom? And indeed, to move away from the kind of liberal anxieties about you know, free speech, and think about the paralyzing fear due to mukhabarat surveillance, totally different levels of a political response to technological determinants. And thus understand these anxieties coming from actual realities that can either be being completely locked up on the internet and surveilled, or just simply, as happened several times, cutting off the whole internet hemisphere. It's almost like a heartbeat. One moment you're online and communicating with your family and friends or comrades in other countries, and the other moment, boom, you don't have a connection. As well as, of course, cyber warfare, the way technology has also helped the army to calculate and to prepare its military assaults much easier than before. So to conclude, I think it's very possible to have a Facebook revolution and a Facebook counter-revolution at the same time. It's not a chronology. It's not like you had a Facebook revolution and then you had the Facebook counter. They were always there together. They were always there. The balance shifted maybe, and our eyes have sharpened a bit in the way the underground reality forces us to actually see both sides. And we also need to be open-minded about why these two elements are part of the same slide, basically. Some of it is motivated by a belief or a concern about anti-imperial resistance that is genuine, that we can't just laugh away. We need to also deal with questions like that in a critical way. So it is not enough to challenge the dichotomy in the sort of techno frameworks only. It is necessary to have an online techno mobilizing struggle and physical confrontations and struggles at the same time. It could be that at some moments the internet is rendered useless, that it has no place in the pyramid, that it's actually something you want to avoid. I know from a colleague who's done research in Manbij who said that people actually don't like journalists coming to live in their neighborhood. Journalists assuming with internet connection, because they feel actually unsafe being surrounded with people with internet connection, because they know it makes them more visible for the army and for the state. And so, in turn, better targets for bombardments. And at other times, they are at the top of the pyramid. But we also must understand where it's not and rethink our role in playing a productive role in this dynamic. It doesn't mean that if you are a programmer or internet researcher that you're useless then. No, you can actually also have multiple identities and think about ways where you can help the struggle when it's not just internet related. Because sometimes, you know, maybe we need courses in how do we catch pigeons, like these guys in Homs. They had no connection, they had no mobile phone, the electricity was cut, they had to start homing pigeons to send messages from neighborhood to neighborhood and to see what was needed. And then, of course, go back to the people involved. And I don't think there was one moment where I was more convinced about changing my attitude to all of this until I actually met and interviewed activists who told me themselves. And these were the internet geeks, huh? These were not the anti-internet folks. These were the people who were actually doing a lot of the secret stuff. But they themselves, they say that they experienced how their online abilities have actually turned against them. And that actually they had to rethink their own position, which meant that sometimes they are hacking, sometimes they need to go out on the street and face the police or the army, that there is no division of labor between the thinkers and the programmers and the doers and the people who received the bullets. So what are the lessons for us here? This morning I read this piece by Chomsky. It was quite interesting, actually, because he kind of expressed what I thought was very clear in that quote from Marx, where he kind of has this attitude of course, the Arab revolutions were going to be threatened because it's, it's of historic importance. Of course, no one's going to give you that on a silver plate. But, and I totally agree with Chomsky, but I disagree with one thing, and that is that we should not fall in the trap of seeing the counter-revolution only as international or geopolitical plots, because that's what this quote is assuming, if you read the rest of the article. We should see them as very messy, complex, contradictory processes within the societies we're studying, regardless of our international relations approaches. So I just wanted to close this by being a bit, by taking off my academic hat and putting on my activist hat and say, I think we should be wary of analyzing revolutions and online activism as case studies for our projects and bring the question down to where we actually are involved, live, pay taxes. And so when I see Hollande yesterday discussing with Cameron, among many things, Syria, and when I read further and realize that Merkel, Hollande, Cameron, and many other leaders of this continent decide to surveil their own Muslim subjects in a different manner than they would their so-called native subjects, because they suggest that they are being recruited to join the revolution in Syria. We need to ask questions. How does the war and the revolution in Syria impede the civil rights of our fellow Germans and Dutch and British citizens who, just because they're Muslim or Arab, are considered higher threats because they might be recruited to join the revolution in Syria? And why different surveillance measures are okay for them compared to others? These are concrete questions that we need to ask ourselves in our departments, in our neighborhoods, we are not above that. We as activists, as designers or programmers or academics should also ask those questions. And we should also ask why our governments refuse to welcome Syrian refugees. Why are so many Syrian men, women and children on the bottom of the ocean, outside Lampedusa, outside Italy, outside Spain, outside Greece? It's because we close our borders, because we don't want them here. And maybe a way to think of this concretely is to think of these refugees as hackers. Maybe they are also hackers, maybe they are designers, maybe they are computer developers who have to run away because they're being enclosed by these circles. So let's think of it that way when we think about trying to engage critically in these complex questions. We don't only have to design programs to avoid surveillance, we also have to design a new narrative to basically resist our governments closing the doors on these people. I'm sorry if this closing of this talk is so negative and maybe demobilizing, but these are the realities, and we are connected with these realities through our governments. And I think the big favor we could do these people, except using them as case studies for our academic careers, is by actually trying to change policies in countries we are present in. And hopefully the next transmediale we can have them give presentations here about their worries and fears and their attempts to help us here rather than us helping them there. So I want to leave it at that. And I think I'm supposed to be then moderating. this session. Thank you. What's your name? I'm going to have to sneak into my bag and try to not do the same thing that always happens to me, namely to mispronounce people's names. Ebru. All right. Yetiskin. Good? Yeah. So Ebru Yetiskin is going to give us, I think, a talk that is very related, namely also based on underground practices that are not in the past or not something from books, but actually happened less than, 8 months ago? And the whole world was thinking that Turkey was going to be the next domino stone of the Arab Spring or Middle East revolutions, and it turned out to be slightly different. And Ebru is going to show us through a new conceptual paradigm, paratactic media, how we should reconceptualize the Gezi protests in terms of internet and online technological activism. So.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Ebru. I first would like to thank Tatiana Bazzicelli for inviting me to share my views with you. I am here as a sociologist who was working with Alternative Informatics Association in Turkey and the Pirate Party of Turkey, and with new media artists in from Turkey, based in Turkey. I was actually start with something else, but I feel like I was going to show the slides at the end of the presentation, but I feel like now showing it right now, because I think we need, after the pessimism, and I share the pessimism that you are drawing, and we don't have a lot of reasons to cheer up. But what we had experienced during Gezi protests was something related with this. And I'm going to show you one moment that we have experienced. Well, as you see, people are imposed to the bombardments of tear gas, and the guy is showing the finger. So I'm going to talk about artistic and hacktivist practices that we had during Gezi protests, and I will try to draw a conceptual, a theoretical perspective. And let me tell you something else from the beginning, that since I am the only one who is talking about Gezi here, and Gezi protests included many different people, including different classes, different neighbors, and I kind of have the responsibility of not representing them, of course, but my talk is going to lack, of course, a lot of people's views here, and that's why I try to narrow down the topic of the presentation with certain artistic and activist practices, and some theoretical approaches that I have driven. In the recent years, we see not only the smart cities, smart cards and smart technologies, but also distributed foolishness, noise of conflicts, and social obsolescence design as political economic controllers and exploiters. This is a work of a contemporary artist whose name is Halil Altındere. A very well-known Turkish artist, and I think his work reflects the exploitative paracolonial, perhaps, westernized, modernist invaders, not just in Turkey, of course, but as a global political problem. And so I mentioned foolishness, noise of conflicts, and obsolescence, social obsolescence design, exhaustion design, on purpose, because these are needed so that a law can pass after all the disputes in the middle of the night, or a new trade deal is signed to exploit the sources of the earth. While we are dealing with these disputes and while we are getting exhausted and saying, oh my God, I'm so tired and I'm so sick of this, we are experiencing that there is a new exploitative deal is going on during the parliament. So we are fed up with this distributed corruption everywhere, not only in Turkey, and decentralized coercive governments and subordinated restricted networks. So actually, Gabriel Tarde and Georg Simmel clearly saw that conflict doesn't constitute a paroxysm of separation between individuals and groups, but tends to be a very intense form of social bonding. So actually, conflict is needed for some. So foolishness in this framework is used by political and market actors as a mining, perhaps sometimes data mining, excavator to generate and extract certain emotions as capital. In this way, the flows of rage capital, fear capital, consciousness capital, love capital are used to occupy and control. During Gezi, since there was a heavy media censorship, due to the financial networking among government media corporations, all mainstream media networks self-censored, not only censored, but self-censored, which means editors and journalists did not publish and they preferred not to publish and write about it. So, you know, in a way, we're talking about, yes, governments and states and surveillance and I don't know, like coercion, but we are also talking about the people who are actually making their choices, not to, in order to execute censorship, in order to execute mass surveillance. So, for instance, CNN Turk broadcasted a documentary about penguins while people were like running around during the protests, and which later became one of the most popular meme of the protest. I want to show you a little work of Ayça about what's going on in Istanbul during the protests.
Sayın Bakanım, Sayın Valim, Sayın Belediye Başkanları, Sayın Rektörüm, Sayın Genel Müdürüm.
Yeter! Yeter! Yeter! Böyle bir şey olmaz!
Survivor, ünlüler gönüllerde.
Penguenler kendilerini bu hayvana karşı iki şekilde korur. Bunlardan biri hız, diğeri manevra yeteneğidir.
Self-censored. The survival of the penguins was perceived as the survival of all struggling actors of diversity, both human and non-human. against the destructive power of contemporary capitalism that we are experiencing today. I mean, the struggle was not only for humans and humanity. I mean, for those who have a little idea of what has happened in Turkey, it all started with environmental destructionism, and it's all started with a tree, you know. And it was not, of course, all about a tree. And someone has been threatened because he said this, by the way. And in contrast to affirmative and romantic accounts of 1990s and the early 2000s, a lot of people have mentioned this view, by the way, here, which celebrated the role of internet for participatory democracy during the 1990s. But during Gezi protests, social media was considered to be, in quote, the worst menace to society, end of the quote, by the government, by Erdogan, by the Prime Minister of Turkey. So one of the reasons of self-censorship and censorship was basically related to the financial networks of government and big corporations, which have investments mainly in construction, real estate, and media sectors. Okay, so we can see the big picture, but we don't know who's related with who and in what terms and how. And that is the thing that we needed to know more about that. I'll come to that later on. But what is tried to be controlled by media censorship and mass surveillance, I thought, when I saw that beauty contest on television when I was in the cafe running around from the tear gas. And really, it was such a surreal experience for me to listen to this woman talking about the world, bringing peace to the world. And I was, you should have seen myself as the beauty queen over there. Really, it was unbelievable. So about this control and control society, Maurizio Lazzarato says, in quote, in societies of control, it is rather a change in what is sensed, believed, desired, and valued is produced within financialist capitalist transformation. So the control of the production, propagation, and transaction of data possesses a potential to change what is sensed, believed, desired, and valued. So the control of media is also about managing this potential, our potential to act in a different way or act in an experimental way. So in these days, what we are still dealing with media censorship. There's an internet censorship law about the past, most probably this Tuesday, via the control of the internet service providers. And but you know, when we look at the picture from this perspective, we recall some like Stigler in 2009 saying, in quote, collective, collaborative, and associative individuation of an economy of contribution may constitute new forms of citizenship, he said. Economy of contribution. So I try to work with this idea, economy of contribution, and suggest a form of collaborative media activism based on artistic and hacktivist interventions, paratactic media. I think before getting into that, I think we need to focus more on experimenting with artistic and hacktivist practices because according to Ulus Bakar, which is a phenomenal sociologist, unfortunately, who passed away so early, he says digital art is not yet realized. It seeks for its people. After working within the organization team of Amber Art and Technology Festival in Istanbul on some previous cases, such as the hurricane hackers of MIT Media Lab, maybe you remember there was this Hurricane Sandy, and then some hackers tracked the data of the people who suffered from the hurricane, and for instance, they tracked the word blanket, for instance, and then they match the ones who need and the ones who give blankets. And so they used this collaborative practice and collaborative hacktivist practice for the commons. I also worked on Negative Money, care of editions of Gerald Schultz. And I kept developing a conceptual perspective by focusing on these practices, especially recent examples. So before talking about these artistic practices, let me try to clarify what I propose by paratactic media. Simply put it, paratactic is a concept associated with the word parataxis. Parataxis means the arrangement of propositions one after the other without other expression of a syntactic relation, without conjunctions, or even without logical connection. So paratactic media refers to creative, open source, collaborative actions and interventions alongside, beside, or beyond tactic and tactical media activisms. Why alongside, beside, or beyond tactic or tactical media activisms? Because I remember we were celebrating the tactical media, and we are still celebrating the tactical media, and I'm suggesting paratactic media, because we see that today both government and market actors also use tactical media and media activisms in very successful ways. So since paratactic is beyond, alongside, beside tactic, we see that today excesses of memes, remixes, mashups, and churn of net trash are indicative of these accelerated conditions of communicative capitalism. For instance, just a few days ago, Erdogan appeared in front of the public as a hologram. And right the next day, this is the video prepared someone anonymous, as a reactionary, responsive tactical media activism. And it is very widely used, this approach, let's say.
İzmir'in tüm ilçelerine, İzmir'deki tüm kardeşlerime buradan selam ve sevgilerimi yolluyorum. İzmir Büyükşehir Belediye Başkan adayımız. 11 yıl Ulaştırma, Denizcilik ve Haberleşme Bakanlığımızın değerli kardeşim, yol arkadaşım Binali Bey'e bu anlamlı buluşmayı sağladığı için, hologram görüntü vasıtasıyla bizleri buluşturduğu için yürekten teşekkür ediyorum.
Well, okay, he thanks. And I thank you for your patience. And Loving and Rossiter mark a paradox at work here, and in tactical media also works with paradoxes, and paratactic media is also working with paradoxes. I mean, we need to work with the paradoxes. They say, in quote, disruptive as their actions may often be, tactical media corroborate the temporal mode of post-Fordist capitalism. They're talking about short-termism. So, indeed, we see that today anonymous users are using these tactics as a quick response for resistance, and maybe their weakness is their short-termism. So, although they might have short-term power, different forms of paratactic media speak to each other and relate without other expression of a syntactic relation, without conjunctions, and even without logical connection. So these two photographs that the quality is really bad, I'm really sorry for that, but these are the photographs that I have taken during the protests, because in the park there were a lot of little fires popped up all of a sudden, like, I don't know, like in like 2 hours, maybe like 7, 8 fires that no one knows who's starting those fires, and people gathers and side by side, you know, collaborating with each other to stop the fire. So these are like real experiences of paratactic collaboration. If tactical media, I suggest, has been the glow of 2000s, perhaps paratactic media can be the afterglow. Paratactic media is not necessarily based on the hip revolutionary techno culture. Rather, it includes low-tech and performative actions with high-tech initiatives. It suggests the creative use of simple tools and what has not been considered as jam. For instance, the swarming attacks done by the creative and collaborative use of hashtags, or barricades from randomly selected units of urban environments. The function of heterogeneous materials are remediated and put side by side for achieving another purpose by the crowd collaboratively. While many people were running around or carrying on with their daily routines during Gezi, Baran Güleşen, a young artist from Turkey, realized on an open source repercussion project against media censorship during the protests. He basically wrote a source code, specified some tasks by algorithms, and shared it online for others to use. If we are pixeled, he thought, if we are pixeled and made invisible because of the media censorship and surveillance, we can do this by ourselves, he thought. The work appropriated and subverted the control power by reducing video streaming resolution in real time by carefully created errors and failures. For Live to Pixel, Baran learned to learn from the control of the use of foolishness performed via media censorship, focusing on visibility and politics and trying to understand what's happening on the screen. He questioned why and how media channels failed to cover the breaking news. For him, at the expense of making a fool of itself, media wanted to tell us something, but we are the ones who don't get it. So, because, you know, media is not only devices or an institution or something, media includes people who make their own choices as well. So, media and its revolutionary aspects is dead, but now what? By repeating the codes of the politics of death, since media is dead, in Baran's work, instead of being subjected to the depleting authoritative measures, it becomes possible for anyone to manipulate the audiovisual information by his or her consent. In this way, the subordinating and coercive power of self-censoring is reappropriated and remediated by the artist who suggested another possibility against given conditions. Another artistic project which offers a way to manipulate data and leave false tracks belongs to Ali Miharbi. The name of the first project, is Rütük, which refers to Radio and Television Supreme Council in Turkey. The work is basically a Firefox add-on which enables anonymous users to censor any text on any web page. So blacked out text, let me just skip to this because this is like the downloading part of the plugin. Yeah. Is it on? Yeah. Yeah, blacked out text is automatically stored in central server, and the connection is made each time a user enters a page or enables the add-on so that they can see an updated, erased version of the internet, shaped by all users anonymously. Or in another work, by turning the computer screen into a giant TV, a foolishness box, Miharbi introduced the restricted websites, censored websites, and he installed them in an alphabetical order. So in a way, we had the chance of meeting with these censored and restricted websites in Turkey. This is from an ongoing collective project, Networks of Dispossession, by Burak Arıkan. In order to reveal the authoritarian monopoly hidden by the complex relationships of business, media, and government, the collective, which he is also working with, aims to reveal the cartography of neoliberal hegemony and its dispossession behavior. As I told you, I mean, we know that the government, media corporations, and other corporations from construction, real estate, and tourism sectors are, yes, collaborating, but we don't know which ones and how do they collaborate. So this project is dealing with that. And having a diversity of experience, knowledge, and sources from different fields, such as law, journalism, art, social sciences, banking, advertising, and finance, the contributors, leakers, and of the project collects data and research data sources available for public access. So actually, each data in networks of dispossession in this project has no value when it is located, for instance, in a specific company's website. For instance, you see a name on a company's board, and when you see that name on a company's board member list, I mean, it doesn't have a value. But when you connect the names, once you start connecting the names with each other, then they start to mean something else. But the trash turned into treasure when it's related within these networks, when it is gathered side by side in relation to other data. So the collective excavates the trash of data and renders a peculiar and hidden knowledge unattainable to people. The last case is a performance which has also augmented with swarming in digital platforms. Standing Man, choreographed by Erdem Gündüz, was one of the most contagious participatory performances in 2013 Gezi protests. Its low-tech do-it-yourself aesthetics, use of spatio-temporality, and open access mentality call attention to performativity and deliberate flaming in restricted networks. So for those who have no idea about Standing Man, I'll try to give you a brief information. At the end of the third week of the protest, an anonymous man started standing in Taksim Square facing the Atatürk Cultural Center, which is still invaded by the police. The front facade of Atatürk Cultural Center, which was transformed into a post-it board, like this, with the side-by-side banners of diverse political groups during demonstrations, was cleared by the police and decorated with national symbols. As hours went by, like 6 hours, the Standing Man caught the attention of the exhausted crowds and created a new media to stay tuned to the resistance movement by not physically moving or resisting, but basically by doing nothing and standing. So after an 8-hour stand-in, resisting to become exhausted, with an increasing performative crowd, Erdem stopped his standing. He declared that he resisted media's ignorance and censorship and asked for a political change. And this is the things that he said, and I've translated. By repeating and imitating the control mechanisms and operations, paratactic media reproduces subversive differences and responsive minor actions and creative interventions, which generate dynamic short-term resistance practices of participatory performative agents. As brilliantly performed in the GIF animations works of Erdal İnce, another emerging young artist in Turkey, we have seen how a single unit is cloned and alongside with others from form another anonymous body of flux, of movement, of light, of color, of gesture, or idea, or behavior, or emotion, as an unexpected responsive minor event. So simple snapshots as single units turn into entrancing and magnetizing video loops by creating volatile hypnotic orders. To conclude, let me just say, paratactic media actors work with and go alongside, beside or beyond the agencies of control that use stupidity, foolishness, noise, conflicts, and social obsolescence design as attention-grabbing and neuron-eroding schemes. Allowing multiple interpretations and encouraging continued open discourse, paratactic media emerges as collaborating and performing with responsive minor hacktivist-like organisms and actions by simply asking, what can we learn from a virus? Thank you.
Shall I introduce you? You deserve it. Sorry for having you wait so long. Our last speaker, who will try to, I think, bring together some of what we said as background, conceptual stuff into what can be concrete alternatives and ways to think about countering these oppressive forces is Philipp Ronnenberg. You were from Hamburg, did you say that?
Yeah.
Almost.
So, yeah.
Hamburg. So you have your own fellow German sitting here who can maybe put it in a German context as well. And then after that, we will have the discussion I proposed immediately, unless Tatiana wants us to do the discussion first. But because we're out of time, okay, I decide. After that, we will have immediately discussion and skip the part we decided beforehand to do. Okay? All right. Just to be mentally prepared. Please, Philipp.
Okay, hey, my name is Philipp Ronnenberg. I'm a German designer and programmer. Basically, I'm doing projects on my own, obviously, and this is the studio I've been working until last July. I graduated from Design Interactions at the Royal College of Art. It's a program where it's about speculative design, critical design. How can we push design in a more critical direction rather than finding solutions to problems? How can we use the design language to propose questions, basically? Personally, I'm really passionate about democratizing technology, open source, phenomenon making, hacking culture, digital projects. And my projects I will show today are on the kind of intersection of fiction and reality. So I start with a couple of examples I find really interesting. So this is Athens' wireless metropolitan network, developed in the early 2000s, I think. Correct me when I'm wrong. This network is an independent infrastructure of wireless intranet and internet as well. But it came from a concrete need that people in Athens were they haven't had any fast internet, so they tried to find solutions how to get a quicker internet rather than depending on these old structures they had. So they started to share their hotspots, and so that they could spread fast internet, basically. But more and more people started to use it when also the government started to restrict part of networks. So today they have nearly 3,000 users, and it's across, I think, 200 kilometers for each. So basically, it's an own kind of internet that people created out of a specific need. A second one is I found this picture from an article about DIY Syria weapons, where Syrians started to repurpose, reuse consumer technology. Basically, this is an interview from a tank where people installed a PlayStation controller and a normal TV screen to control a gun, which you can see on the upper left side. basically hooked up with motors, and but they need a kind of interface. So that's the PlayStation controllers for. But there's again with this kind of DIY technology, there's a specific need that you have to sit in a tank somehow and be protected. You can't look outside, so, and you have to control the gun. So they use this controller. A third example is from Germany, where I found this image. This image was next to a small community in southern Germany, where the people living in this village were really annoyed of having trucks passing by their village. But that happened because of the GPS systems told the truck drivers, look, there's a shortcut throughout this village, and you can actually save money. You don't have to pay the fee for the main roads. So lots of trucks came into this village, drove through, and annoyed all the citizens, obviously. And the citizens were really smart. They thought, okay, if they don't get the suggestion to use the shortcut through our village, the trucks disappear. So they installed basically GPS jamming devices that this village somehow disappeared from the map from the truck drivers. So I don't know if that was working out well, but was really amazing. Again, there's a specific need. The villagers were really annoyed by all the trucks passing through their village, and so they found a way to get around it and get rid of the trucks. And now I'm gonna go on with my own projects. That looks really ugly. Anyways, I created 3 projects last year. All of these are wrapped in a topic called post-cyber war series. And basically, as I said, I'm working also on speculative stuff on the intersection of fiction and reality. I created this scenario, which is really feasible, I think, that in a situation of a cyber war, when cyber war occurs, governments are at the moment thinking of installing more and more controlling instances on networks, on the internet, on cell phone networks, on navigation networks. And when in the situation when a cyber war occurs, they are able to shut the networks down, that the general public can't use it anymore. And then this is the scenario, and I created a series of projects, 3 projects. One is dealing with navigation, another one is dealing with data streaming, and another one is dealing with data storage. And all these projects are basically to prepare for a time when cyber war occurs and we don't have these networks around us anymore. So we kind of, there would be an actual need, coming back to the needs again, that we would need alternative infrastructures or alternative technology to still communicate, to still navigate, and also have in mind the luxury of technology that we don't want to miss. So the first one in the series is a project called Open Positioning System. I've created a website, it's called openps.info, where I'm trying to gather interested people around this project, and basically it's an open source GPS system which is not controlled by governments or institutions. And as I said, on this website, I'm trying to gather interested people, and the idea is to be independent from satellites. That's what all these systems work, GPS, GNOSSA, and all the others as well, to use seismic activity produced by large machines and factories, or turbines and pumping stations, and or other factories. Basically, all machines, while they stand on the ground, are producing tiny earthquakes while they work. And these earthquakes are distributed over the ground. So I created a small sensor prototype which can detect seismic activity, basically. So to come to the technical explanation, basically, if you can detect 3 different seismic sources produced by machines, turbines, and so on, you can basically calculate your position within these 3 sources. The little dot with the latitude and longitude is us walking around with my sensor prototype, and you can see the Stratford Energy Center, Abbey Mills Pumping Station, and Southeast Combined Heat and Power. All of these produce seismic activity, and while I receive all these together, I can, as I said, calculate my position. This is my the latest prototype I've developed, and it shows a tiny computer, a mobile one, with a map and the sensor in a photofilm bucket, and it's with the spiral cable. It's meant to put on the ground or on the wall, because if you want to receive this seismic activity, you need to be at least once very close to a seismic source to filter out any noise around it. It's not that luxury as my smartphone today, but it's it's a kind of it's an experiment, but I'm also the ultimate goal would be to have a serviceable system which could compete with a GPS, military run GPS, or any other navigation system. So I'm looking for funding. I'm trying to develop it further, but it's kind of really hard because people don't see the need in this kind of development at the moment. As it is, it's part of a speculative scenario, but still, I mean, there could be actual needs, but it's quite hard to find funding or investors for a project like this. So it's still ongoing. So if you want to be part of it or you want to contribute anything, let me know. This is the second project in the series, and it's called Social Teletext Network. It's basically using old, obsolete technology, which we don't need anymore, which was thrown away a couple of years ago, and now finally in the UK it's not used anymore. In Germany we still have it. The idea is to have a communication infrastructure for data streaming, basically, apart from internet or any other system which would rely on governmental controlling instances. To come back to the kill switch, the cyber war kill switch, where we could shut off internet, and it's using old, as I said, old technology, analog broadcasting of television streams, where I could embed information in the form of video text, teletext, or in UK it was called CFAX. By the end of 2012, in the UK, most of the main broadcasters switched over from analog broadcasting to digital broadcasting. And the result of that is that analog frequencies are becoming free and they're not used anymore. And this network makes use of these old frequencies, which are now free, to distribute information. And the idea is also to have is a mesh network built by users and maintained by users. But the next thing is I found really interesting, or I found really important about it is. In a kind of a Western view of things, that we would still need to have a luxury comfort aspect of it, rather than that need which we don't have yet. But if we are in the situation that internet is shut off, when I was living in London that time, I imagined, speculated about it, people really would probably miss social networks. So there's a social network running on this system, and it's also trying to use different luxury interface elements, which we know from our smartphones or we know from any other technology we are using. So you could basically dial into different regions here by dialing a number. I hope everybody's familiar with the method how video text is working. So if I dial 134, for example, I get a zoomed-in version of this map and a kind of visualization of where other users are, and this I imagine would be a social network profile page with a generic cat, obviously, where people are using this to still communicate in the cyber war situation and still exchange. Somebody's writing, "Okay, I'm DJing at the Barfly tonight. Come around." Yeah, I'm also coming, and look at my new profile images. Yeah, stuff like that. So. Yeah, to come to the third project is a bit more complicated. This is more speculative. As the first and the second project, the open positioning system and the social teletext system are working today, this is more speculative. This is about that scientists are today working on data insertion and extraction, basically use organic DNA as a storage medium, because physical space is getting more and more reduced. Power consumption of media storage is another issue, and scientists are working on the insertion and extraction using DNA as a data storage, and this new scientific approach in this project is used to use it in a novel way, where I imagined if everybody can use this technology, we could use it differently as well, rather than just in a lab or in a commercialized way. And basically 1 gram of DNA is capable of holding 700 terabytes of data. 1 gram is a tiny piece like that. So it's just as a hint how much data is basically in there in a really tiny piece. So this is oops. Is it doing something? Shit. Oops. Anyways, okay. This is showing a visualization of how I imagined this new scientific development could be used. The idea is basically to use the London sewer system to put data in an algae bacteria living in the sewer system. So this is a kind of really nice way of protecting physically and also protecting the data and also make it undestroyable in a way that it's self-reproducing, it's moving around, and you kind of can't find it. So the idea on this is that I believe in a couple of years we probably have this technology, but the internet we will have is a different one, when it's more censored, more purely commercialized. Probably we won't find things that we find today, are more uncanny, more unwanted content will disappear. So this could be a place where you could still find things which disappeared from the normal internet. And these are images from so-called stench pipes. These are exhausts directly to the sewer system, and I imagine that this is an access point to the sewer system it gives me direct access to the sewer system, and it can grow on the right side. It can grow also on the street, and it gives you a smelling index in a way. If the density is really high, if the density of data, of algae, bacteria in the sewer system is really high, you could go around and could smell it and yeah, say by smell that it's that I should take a look and hear what's going on under me here. Yeah. So this what the presentation model I've built, where it shows different aspects or different stations on the sewer system. So I imagine that there's one guy accessing the sewer system through a stench pipe, and in the back on the up right you see local corner shops. That was taken from Whitechapel area in London. I don't know if you know it. It's a kind of dirty, multicultural area where you find just anything. You find lots of corner shops, and these are offering SIM cards, SIM unlocking devices next to fruits, and these kind of grey area shops. I imagine that's where extraction and insertion would take place. That these on the left side, the blue woman, that these shops are offering extraction and insertion, and it's a way of a kind of a lottery game also, because it's really hard to find exactly what you're looking for. You always have to check, but also I think it's a kind of grey area act. The extraction and insertion is totally legal as everybody's using it. We all need to use it, but the content you could find on it could be illegal. So it's a kind of also playing with this SIM card unlocking or unlocking devices metaphor, which is also kind of grey area act. So to to sum up some thoughts I've and some of the projects I did. I mean, my projects are more designed for a Western world. I mean, I talked about luxury needs of a social networks running on analog frequencies, but I started with the needs in a crisis situation, or in a situation where people actually need to think about new networks or infrastructures or technology. We are not in this situation at the moment, not in Western Europe that much as in other parts of the world. I think it's a way of one really important thing is to make people aware of another need. There's coming in the NSA mainstream media coverage, which is somehow helpful, I think. To make people aware of a thing. I believe in 2014 we get lots of new security-related products, new services, encrypted emails and stuff like that, which could help. But still, is all these things are maintained and run by large corporations or governments. So it's, I don't know if that's a change. This is a question for you probably as well. And yeah, that's pretty much it from me.
So thank you very much for the speakers. We're running a bit late. I guess I talked too much in the beginning. You promised to time me, you didn't. So I think we're going to have to compromise a bit on that. So I think I'm going to propose to skip the usual moderation, attempt to tie in all the talks together, and suggest to use maybe if we can have 5 minutes extra because we started later as well. Okay. All right. Oh, all right. Okay, well that's like in 20 minutes, right? Okay, okay. So we have about 15 minutes, I guess, for discussion and then wrap up. Can I suggest that we take questions from the audience in parts rather than do a one-on-one, because that's usually so time-consuming. So to basically maybe introduce yourself so that we know whether you are part of the corporate circle or the mukhabarat or just someone who's really interested. It helps me decide whether I'm going to bother answering or not. And specify to whom you want to address the question. If this is not the case, if you want to have an open question, that's fine as well. And can I also suggest that we sort of remove a bit the hierarchies, and if someone else actually has a much better answer to what is being posed from the audience but is not sitting here, to actually take the opportunity and answer the question. So let's have a discussion or a Q&A, and I will just choose 2 or 3 people to start with. Who wants to? I think the last talk, by the way, is raising so many concrete questions as well. Like, how the hell do you want to actually build this sewage system? But so concrete questions, conceptual questions, political questions, all are welcome. Please do. Don't be shy. I've learned to wait when this happens. Come on. Yep. Thank you.
I didn't catch whether the analog TV social network project, whether you've connected different TVs to one another and created a sample network.
Yeah, it's a mesh network basically. You need some more hardware than just your old TV, obviously. You need a teletext inserter device, which is really hard to find. Luckily, I found a guy on the internet who sent one over from 1990, and he said, "Yeah, take this." First, those are quite expensive, and as it is kind of obsolete technology, it's really hard to find technology which is useful. So we better be quick and buy everything we can find. But so you need this inserter device, and then you insert the teletext information, which you can create with your computer in an empty video signal. And this empty video signal you can stream basically with an amplifier and a transmitter to everybody around you. And the idea is that you need beacons, stronger antennas, which are higher and have stronger amplifiers, to distribute over a larger range.
So then, are the different applications of this network then channels on the TV?
You could do that, but the idea was more to have one TV channel with an empty video signal. That if you turn on your television and tune into this frequency we are broadcasting on, you don't see anything. You just see white noise, as it is an empty video signal. But as soon as you activate the teletext, you see an empty layer popping up on top of that white noise signal. Yeah, you could do both. The idea this was to have one channel, and you have 880 pages, so you're kind of restricted to some users. I said in the setup that there are 500 user pages, so it's kind of restricted technically.
So I ask a question. Didn't want to be the first one because otherwise I feel I'm executing too much power. But no, actually this is to you, Miriyam, because I think would be perhaps interesting that we also share with the others the conversation we had by mail related to the definition of our Arab Spring that you were really critical about. I think since I am also not an insider, I did the mistake in writing in the first text I sent to you this kind of definition, Arab Spring, and you told me, no, I don't really recognize myself into that, you should change into Arab Uprising or Arab Revolution. And so I think that this could be something interesting to discuss, and also why you are critical to that, and also another question would be speaking about, Arab revolution is perhaps also really encompassing as well. So maybe also there we should do different definition, because I think at the same time also discourse of Arab revolution is really general. So perhaps there should be other names to give to these kind of things related to the different countries in Middle East. And also if you reflected in how certain revolution has been also undertaken in other countries that are close to you, and if there are many, how do you see the relationship?
Yeah, so I think there are two different levels of critical analysis or responses. I think on the one hand, there has been a longer history of political choices in terms of which label to reserve for which political event. So when we talk about terminology and labels, it doesn't happen in a tabula rasa. It's based on a genealogy of events and experiences. So a lot of the people involved in the area and outside were immediately reminded by labels that were used before to describe the protests in Lebanon as a cedar revolution, or the orange revolution in Eastern Europe, or all kinds of different labels that were often prescribed, if not started by press conferences in Washington. So there's one side of the critique that people have an allergia towards externally imposed labels. The other critique is more fundamental, and that's in, of course, the power of language and concepts, in that it actually entails something. The problem with spring, of course, is that it's a seasonal reference which assumes a beginning and an end, and it's the problematic explanation of revolutions as being events rather than processes that are very painful and long-term and messy and involve several springs and winters and falls and what have you. So I think the critique was a genuine critique from below. Activists themselves were very reluctant to employ those labels because it didn't come from within. It's an English term anyway, which was interestingly enough then also internalized by a lot of Arab media. So, it was quite funny to see how Arab media was then translating English terms into Arabic. Arabi al-Arabi, or, so that's the issue. I think the painful reality is, of course, that we are also now in a process of redefining whether we can still use the term Arab revolutions because of the enormous backlash. When El-Sisi announced that he was going to run for president in Egypt last week, a lot of people felt that the counter-revolution basically is winning. And a lot of people felt this was the Pinochet moment of the Middle East, where the army not only co-opts the movement, but actually then puts forward its own representative to rule the country. So I think it's still safe to use Arab revolutions if we agree that these revolutions will always be confronted with counter-revolutions. So if we don't have a naive understanding of what it means, that it's only positive, that it includes the pessimistic that I ended up with, that it's just the other side of the coin. The safer option would be Arab uprisings, and to say these are uprisings, these are human uprisings that happen in human history. You lose a lot and you win some, and that's how we have to look at it. Why is it Arab? Because, you have to have a beginning and an end somewhere. As an internationalist, I would prefer world uprisings or world revolutions, but I think that's mostly the case because people need to have some kind of reference. And I think the Arab uprisings of revolutions were distinguished in the sense that it is a population or community that is very much linked by a language. it's not the Middle East revolutions, it's not the Islamic revolutions, it's not the what have you, but it started with slogans like الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام from Sidi Bouzid and Tunis, which were very easily echoed and copied in other places because of the very simple fact that it was sharing a language. But it doesn't end there. We feel that what happens elsewhere, whether it's Turkey or Washington or New York or Berlin, that it's part of the same struggle. So I hope that's... Any other questions or disagreements or suggestions? Yeah.
Let me just introduce myself. My name is Usama Mubarak, and I actually come from Palestine as well. I'm a programmer, and it might sound a little bit stupid, but I feel that the conflicts of Syria and everywhere else are actually part of a more global conflict, which is a conflict that comes from our current use of technology and the political systems that we have here in the West, that is starting to... we see it a lot in documentaries that they're saying that the environment is... We're just exploiting the Earth in such a way that the environment is just going to disintegrate. I'd say, like, we will not have enough resources in the future. I think in the next 40, 50 years we will see this. And my question is more global. Is the activism that you're proning, is it not maybe a little bit self-centered? Shouldn't we see a more global activism? And maybe I would start to think of ways to get more independent of all this structure, get more independent of the technology. As a developer, I feel that I'm using technology in a way that I shouldn't be using it. When I buy a computer, I think I'm wasting resources of the Earth, and I shouldn't be doing this. And shouldn't we look at a more global, the global conflict that we're all going through? Isn't it not just a Syrian or a Turkish problem? Shouldn't we look at the more global picture?
I'm just going to pass the question somewhere else. So the only thing I can say is, yes, think globally, but act locally, because people are mobilized through local needs and fears, and whether we like it or not, whether it's self-determination, whether it's anti-racism, I think that's the mobilizing vibe that usually works. Again, ideally, I wish it was otherwise, but maybe this is something that also you can talk about from the Turkish perspective, because a lot of people were saying Turkey is the next step that started in Tunisia, and that's good and bad in a sense to look at it that way. So maybe you can answer the question, and then maybe Philipp can also answer the question, because this is a very big one.
Yeah, I think, of course, do local stuff, then scale it up and bring it to other people. I mean, otherwise it's not working. You know, as a developer as well, that's how it's working. But I think the most challenging thing about this is that we have different needs in different countries, I think. That's what I tried to say within my presentation as well. If I develop a project like the OpenGPS could be needed in a specific country much more than in Germany. So people are not really open to it, I think, if they don't need it. Same as, for example, Linux is always, I think for me, is a really good example coming from design side. Is a really great idea, and it's they're doing it worldwide open, but it's not. I mean, it's not made for the needs for my needs, for example. I mean, I could use it, but the barrier of having some problems with it is still much too high for the ordinary user, I think. So it's a specific target group which are using it, that which the people who want to deal with technology and want to challenge themselves and want to install a new driver, or I don't know. It's really about needs, I think. Yeah, as we feel, I can only speak for Germany, for example. When we don't need an encrypted email service, we won't use it because usually it's more complex to use. I need to set up something. We are really lazy, so it's. I think we really need to want something which we are annoyed by. Otherwise, it's not working out that people are using it. I think it has to be really annoying.
I agree with you. On the one hand, for instance, after Gezi protests, Alain Badiou and Slovak Zizek, they came to Istanbul, and they dared to talk about Istanbul revolution. Sorry, I mean they missed the context. I mean, you know, Gayatri Spivak has this amazing book called Other Asias. So when you're far away from the region and you don't know the real context, you just say Asia. Come on, it's like Asia. And, you know, by being involved in a regional context, sitting in this couch, still, somehow I think we need to track on the differences between these movements. On the other hand, I think you mentioned in your talk that it is like this fluctuations of revolutionary movements all around the world right now. Ukraine, friends in Ukraine, you know, it is going up and down, and so it is certainly at the same time not a local problem. You know, upstairs, you know, we are talking about geology of media and archaeology of media and Earth becoming media, and you are also referring to the exploitation of the resources. And I have tried to give the reference to Gezi protest. You know, everything has started with the tree. You know, it was a matter of life and death of one single tree, and everyone felt empathy with that little tree. So it is human, non-human entities who are trying to survive against the hegemonic violence and violations of global capital power.
I'm looking at you, Tatiana. Do you want us to wrap up, or do you? There's one or two more questions. Can we continue over time, or do you want us to? Or should this be the last one?
Maybe last question.
Okay, the last question.
Yeah. Oh, me? Okay. Hello, my name is Rasmus Vuori. I'm from Finland, so I'm living in quite a peaceful country, but I don't have, the microphone is heavy. I don't have a question really, but more a comment to what you said about this being local and being far away, and the concept of Asia. And in a way, now I almost feel a bit embarrassed also here in this situation about the term of the Arab Spring, and because there is, I think there's a strong element of something in Western media about something happening far away, and we completely forget to talk about the London riots that actually were very similar. There was the Blackberry riots, and it was started from something went wrong, and it's actually a very similar movement, but it happened too close, and we don't see that in the same kind of a context. So I think it's important that to be able to separate this and not to see things as black and white. And it's way too easy to endorse something that's happening very far away, that's not touching our lives, but something that's happening very close, we react in a completely different way. And I think that's a really important thing. And yeah, that was just a comment. It wasn't a question, but yeah. Thank you.
We all agree, I guess. But also, let's not forget our own media is very selective. It's not just what is far away, it's what is far away and complies to our agenda. I don't see much about Bahrain, I don't see much about the Sahara, I don't see much about other very far away, messy, bloody uprisings. So even within that, we need to be critical that it's selective and orientalist at the same time. It sounds paradoxical, but apparently we're very well served to do that. I wish we had ended with a sort of optimistic note. I do think that I was really fascinated by Philipp's paper, because I learn again from conferences like this that where programmers and designers and makers meet with writers and thinkers and doers, we can actually maybe synchronize and come up with something. So I really hope if there's more people like Philipp around, or Ebru, to give me your email addresses. I'm in contact with activists on the ground in different countries in the area, and I think if they don't already know a lot about practical solutions, and maybe they know better than you do, and you can learn from them as well, then I would like to put you in touch with them and make this also a practical meeting point that has some long-term effect. The sewage system, I will never forget that. But, brilliant, thank you. And I think, Tatjana, do you want to close the meeting? Okay, thank you all very much and for your patience, and we hope to see you again.